Hey, missing listeners. As the year comes to an end, we were reminded of one of the best series we produced here at Missing in 2023. It's the case of Patricia Tucker, who was formerly a Jane Doe known as Granby Girl. And in this episode, you'll hear clips from 3 separate interviews we conducted about this case. The first is with private investigator Lou Barry and Lisa Binz, who is actually a relative of Patricia through marriage. They speak about the investigation, and then we'll hear from Kristen Mittelman of Othram Labs, who will tell us about the genetic genealogy angle that was pursued in this case and that did help a great deal. And in the final segment, we'll speak with Patricia's son, Matt Dale. He tells us what this was like from his perspective. We really hope you enjoy this episode. Have a great couple of holidays. Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim, here today with Lance. Lance, how's it going today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim, mostly because we have a couple of great guests on. One is a recurring guest who always brings information to the table that's useful to us. It's Lou Barry, former police chief, and he's joining us because the identity of a young woman who was previously unidentified for decades is finally known. But before we get to that, what I would like to know now is how you are.
Thank you, Lance. I am doing great. Yeah, I am excited to introduce this conversation as well. Granby Girl was the name of a Jane Doe that was found in Granby, Massachusetts on November 15th, 1978. Her name is now, again, Patricia Ann Tucker. She has previously gone by Patricia Coleman, Patricia Heckman, and Patricia Dale. So, right off the top here, if anyone has known of Patricia Coleman, Heckman, Dale, or Tucker, please contact the Granby Police Department. They'd like to speak with you. In addition, Patricia was married at the time, which we're going to go into in this conversation, but she was married at the time of her disappearance to a man named Gerald Coleman. And if anyone's got any information about Gerald Coleman, the Granby Police would like to speak with you. In addition to Lou Barry in this conversation, we are joined by Lisa Binz. Lisa is affiliated with DNAngels, which is a really cool organization. You can find out more about what they do at DNA, and it's the rest of the word of angels. The A in DNA is combined with the A in angels for that URL. And Lisa's sister is married to the son of Patricia Tucker. His name is Matt. I spoke with him yesterday. Great guy. We're going to try to have him on the podcast soon. DNAngels is not to be confused with Othram Labs, which had a big part of making the identification of Granby Girl.
Well, all of that information, Tim, is a bit of a puzzle to put together, but it's not a difficult puzzle to put together. Once you hear this conversation, there are pieces of a puzzle that came together, unrelated or related, and Lou is related to the town of Granby because he was the police chief there for a while. He was not the police chief at the time of Patricia Tucker's murder. However, he did start there shortly thereafter. I think he says like 9 years after, but it's always been a staple in the heart of Granby. They've always looked at Granby Girl as this dark moment in their history that they finally get to put a right to. This is a result that's happened through multiple different avenues, like you said. DNAngels, Lisa, Lou, the Granby Police, Othram, family members, and finally this person who was previously known as Granby Girl, unknown, on her grave marker, will finally have a name. And then you can move into the investigation in order to figure out who perpetrated her murder.
This is kind of a complicated mystery, and Lou puts it very well in this conversation. He says that he's usually looking for a missing person with his work with private investigations for the missing, but this is kind of the opposite, where you're searching for information about this person who was found and you don't have the identity at this point. So it's definitely interesting. And I want to throw out this phone number. If anyone's got any information about Patricia Tucker, about Gerald Coleman, please call the Granby Police at 413-467-9222.
And Tim, for any of the listeners who would like to enjoy this episode and piece all of these puzzle pieces together without the ads interrupting their listening experience, where can they find this episode and all the other episodes that we got going on?
Listeners can now subscribe to Missing Premium right there in their Apple Podcasts app. It's $4.99 a month. You can get ad-free listening. You get our weekly bonus show, and you also get some early releases. And don't worry, if you're not an Apple user, you can go to missing.supportingcast.fm and sign up for the same product there.
And furthermore, if one were to be interested in following us on social media, I'm sure there's an easy answer to that.
There is. You can follow us at MissingCSM. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Lou and Lisa. And we're going to play a quick clip from the March 5th, 2023 press conference. And First Assistant District Attorney for the Northwestern DA's office, Steve Gagney, speaks during this conference.
On November 15th of 1978, skeletonized and clothed human remains were found near a logging road off of Amherst Street here in Granby. We now know who Granby Girl is. Patricia Ann Tucker.
My name is Lisa Binz, and I'm actually Patricia's son, Matt. We call him Matt, not Matthew. I'm his sister-in-law. He's married to my sister. I'm the one who actually a couple of years ago convinced him to do his DNA through Ancestry. And so we kind of started on this journey a couple of years ago trying to find his mom. But we kept running into dead ends until about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
Wow. Can you tell us about those dead ends?
Well, basically, I was doing it all through Ancestry, and, we could find marriage certificates. We could find, her birth records. We could find some newspaper articles and stuff. But then it was just like all of a sudden there was no paper trail. It ended. We didn't have anywhere else to go.
And Lou, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
I was a police officer for 35 years. I was chief of police in Granby for 24 of those. Prior to that, I was down on the Cape for 11 years. And I moved up to Granby to accept the chief of police position here. And relative to this case, one of the first things I did was go through the files and look at, what we had for cold cases or old cases. I shouldn't necessarily say cold. And one of the most striking was that of what has been known or who has been known to be called Granby Girl, which was an unidentified deceased female subject of a homicide who had been found in a wooded area off one of our roads back in 1978. And there was no identification at all or identifiable features.
I know you have a passion for cold cases. I guess I'd like to know what that was like for you entering that station and becoming chief when this case had happened in the past.
Realistically, at the time, cold cases were not really something I was involved in at all. However, this particular case struck me in that there was just nothing that was able to identify her. And perhaps this is part of the reason why I later, after my retirement, got involved in cold cases through private investigations for the missing, because of a case like this where knowing there's family members out there that just needed closure somehow. And we, off and on worked on the case, even though we really had very little to go on. The most identifiable thing was a shirt that was left at the scene with a design of a swan on it. And that was kind of the most recognizable thing that we had that we were hoping someday someone would identify. Of course, that was many years ago prior to DNA. And like I said, off and on, we looked at the case throughout the years, and it was never forgotten. I can tell you that, but we really had nothing to go on until they decided to do an exhumation back a year and a half or so ago, I think. And through that, indirectly got some DNA and were able to identify Patricia's niece. And through Patricia's niece, identified Patricia's son, Matthew. And that was about, I want to say 6 weeks ago. I got a phone call during supper one night and said, "Hey, Chief, we identified her. We know who she is," and which was just unbelievable news. And things moved fast after that. The scientific part is one part of the investigation, and then it was down to good old fashioned police work. And that I can't say enough about the efforts put forth by District Attorney Sullivan's office out of the Northwest District Attorney's office, the state police troopers led by Captain Cahill out of the detective unit there, and Granby's detectives, Detective White, Detective Carpenter, Chief O'Grady, certainly, and Lieutenant Pooler are all put in hours and hours now doing the paper trail to put all these pieces together and reach where we are today.
Can you just tell our listeners what Granby's like, and then we can get into the investigation? Like, what was that like as a town back then, and how has it changed?
The town was a rural farming type community for many, many years. And then back in the early 40s, Westover Air Force Base was constructed and led to a big influx of population of people from all over the country, Air Force related. So the town grew kind of rapidly at that point. And then when Westover became a reserve base, it kind of took the opposite turn, and population leveled off and actually dropped for a little bit. And now it's more of a suburban community. Still has that rural small town feeling, but it's in very close proximity to Springfield, is 15 minutes away. Chicopee, we border to the south along with Ludlow, both cities. Holyoke is right across the river on the other side of South Hadley. And then to our north is Amherst with the University of Massachusetts. So it's kind of a small, rural, still type suburban community surrounded by larger cities and communities. Going back to the late 70s, it was even more rural than it is now. And in the area that Patricia was ultimately found, at that point was undeveloped. It was just wooded area. Now there's houses there and everything. But like I said, it's still a small town. And I think that's evidenced by the interest in this case. The entire community is invested in Patricia. And I don't know how aware everyone is, but originally her grave was marked with a simple white cross. That was it. And one of our cemetery commissioners, a gentleman by the name of Tony Reagan, who was a fantastic citizen of our town, was a cemetery commissioner, and he took upon himself to decide, this isn't right. She needs a marker. He publicized the fact that, we're going to try and raise money, and I think a day later they had the funds. One businessman in particular who didn't want to be known wrote a check, and there's been a marker on her grave. Unfortunately, it said unknown up until now. Again, the type of community that it is, we've started a fundraiser to buy a new stone and put her name on that stone. And I can tell you right now, less than 30 hours afterwards, we are well on our way to reaching that goal.
Lisa, I would like to know from you what it was like looking into Patricia's disappearance. Before she was identified, she was a missing person, and that was something that you were obviously aware of. So how did you go about trying to work on Patricia's disappearance?
Well, like I said, Matt did his DNA. So, of course, in Ancestry, you get to see the matches, of who he matches with. He did have some cousins on her side that he matched with. I started building out the tree. I'm just going to say this. We are a very close-knit family. When he said, "Can you find my mom?" I just felt that sick feeling because he wanted to know so bad what happened to his mother. Being 5 years old and being left and never seeing your mother again, I'm sure that, he felt abandoned. He didn't understand why. Then he was being shuffled from one location to another. That curiosity has always been in the back of his mind. He's always, kind of talked about her. He has showed her the baby book and the things that she left for him. But it was just, this feeling of, I need to find her. I think he had reconciled in his head that there was a possibility that she wasn't alive, but we couldn't find proof of that. We couldn't find anything in any of the online records to show yes or no. So we kind of put it on hold for a little while. And then I remember the day I got the phone call. He called me and he said, "Hey, I think we can stop looking for mom." And my heart fell. I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Well, I got home from work today and there were two police officers that pulled up and talked to me and asked me to contact a detective in Massachusetts." And he said, "I think my mom's a Jane Doe." And I mean, just the hurt, you know, it was real. But I think this weekend, as he drove up there, I think reality started setting in more. And he FaceTimed me when he got to the grave. And I think that's when it hit him the hardest.
Do you know when Patricia was reported as being missing?
Well, I can tell you that just from Matt, that his grandparents did report her missing. I believe they went to the FBI, but back then and that time, I don't know, was that a high priority if an adult went missing? I don't know. I don't think things back then are the same as the way things are today when someone goes missing.
We know that her husband at the time did not report her missing, which is rather telling in itself. My understanding, and again, I of course am not involved directly in the investigation, so I'm just picking up bits and pieces from the detectives in the DA's office and everything. But her parents did report her missing to the FBI a couple years later, I believe, in New Jersey. But this is way back before technology is what it is today, and it was very little, since we had very little at this end to go on, except clothing. There's really a difficult matchup there, if you know what I mean. That was before DNA was put into CODIS, and NamUs was there, but through the years we tried to match up with NamUs missing persons that fit the description and the age and all that, but we're never able to make that connection. So I do know that right now they are working with the FBI to try and backtrack and find out what was reported, what information they had, and et cetera. But I don't know exactly what that information is at this point.
Patricia has been revealed to be Patricia Tucker, but she went as Patricia Coleman at one time, I believe at the time of her murder, which leads us to Gerald Coleman, her husband, who you mentioned, who never reported her missing. Can you tell us a little bit about him?
Sure. She had married Coleman sometime, I think it was in 1977, perhaps. They had actually purchased a home down in East Hampton, Connecticut. In August of 78, showed up in Chicopee, Mass., the town just south of us here. And if I have this correct, they were inquiring about perhaps renting an apartment and requested that Matt, who was 5 at the time, be left there for this woman by the name of Laura Holmes to babysit while they took care of some unfinished business. On August 10th, I believe they got a call from Patricia saying they had been delayed, but they were en route to pick up Matthew. And that's the last time that we are aware of that Patricia was ever heard from. So we're assuming that's right around when something tragic happened to her. Gerald Coleman, who she was married to, then kind of dropped off the map until the 90s when he showed up in Westfield and was arrested on a rape charge. He subsequently went to prison and died in prison in 1996. And obviously they're very, very interested in speaking to anyone who knew Patricia or Coleman during that time period, or at any point, actually, because they obviously like to track what his whereabouts were, et cetera, et cetera.
Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about Patricia? Who was she? What was she like, if as much as you know?
Well, I never met her. I'm going to say this. She had to have been a loving mother, because To have a detailed baby book the way he has up until he's 5 years old, she had to be a loving, attentive mother. Otherwise, he wouldn't have anything. And even today, a lot of people do their first child, and then that second and third child, they kind of get left by the wayside and you don't have as many detailed baby books. But I have to say that, through all of this, I am totally convinced that she had to have been a very loving mother. And at the end of the day, she lost her life, but she saved her sons.
Tim, I might add, I know in speaking to the detectives that they, like I said, they have, done some backtracking and spoken to former neighbors when Matthew was a young child. And they all say the same thing, that Patricia was an unbelievable mother and everybody liked her. And she was fantastic with the kids. And Coleman, not so much. They didn't have much good to say about him. But she was very well thought of by the people that knew her, both as an individual and as a parent.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
And now in this next part, we're speaking with Kristen Mittelman, who is Chief Business Development Officer at Othram, about Othram's role in solving this case. For more information, check out Othram.com and DNAsolves.com.
Yeah, so this is one of the first cases we worked in Massachusetts, and you can see there's a couple announced now, and now we have a partnership with them. We're working many more cases I'm excited about. This was a case where the remains were found outside, and they were actually quite contaminated. They were degraded. There was all those things that are difficult about finding human remains outside. They were part of this case. This was one of those cases that was a little bit more difficult to get DNA from. And so when we got the bones, we did our standard suitability analysis. We did know that we could work this case and we could build a profile, but we knew that we'd have to collect more data. And so we did. We worked on the case for some time and built the best DNA profile that we could build from those remains, and then uploaded the profile to these genealogical databases consented for law enforcement use. Our in-house genealogy team worked on the matches and was able to provide a name of a family member back to the law enforcement agency. When they contacted that family member, the family member pointed them to Patricia's living son and said that, yes, there was someone missing in their family, and they believed that he would be the closest match. And so law enforcement followed up on that lead and collected DNA, and we were able to show that there was 100% parent-child match. And so our identity was confirmed, which he had been looking for his mom the entire time. This is a story where the person she was married to at the time dropped him off, and then he left with the mother and he never saw her again. And he had spent all of these years, 4.5 decades, looking for her. This was able to give him that answer of, this is what happened. Your mom didn't run away. She didn't leave you. Like, these are things that people live with forever. Did my parent just leave me here and go somewhere else? Are they still alive, and will they come back one day? Did something terrible happen to them? Can I find out what happened to them and get justice for them? These are sort of the everyday questions that these families live with that start to unravel when you are able to give a name to those unidentified remains that were found.
How long was Othram working on the Granby Girl case?
I think we were working on the case for almost 2 years. This was a difficult case as far as the bones actually producing a profile. And the genealogy part was actually only a few months of that. And so it truly was the building of that DNA profile, collecting enough data from those remains that were so contaminated and so very difficult to collect DNA data from. The human component of those bones was very small.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point there that people live with this every single day of their lives. And this individual, her son, lived with it thinking that his mom might have abandoned him. And you don't know what that does. People don't know what that does to that person when they become a parent and how they start treating their children. And to finally get the answer, maybe that will help in any difficulty that person might have had in parenting. Maybe there's time to, undo some damage that was unintentionally caused because this parent felt like he was abandoned and she felt like she was abandoned, and it goes back generations. So it is a much larger scoped mission beyond just like our world of true crime. I mean, this is something that actually can help generationally.
Absolutely. And it is something that follows the families. This is something I remember, the Little Miss Nobody case. She was a little girl that was found in Arizona. I don't know if you remember, but we identified her as Sharon Lee Gallegos, and it had been some time. The nephew of her mom was actually at the press conference. So that's quite far removed. And so it was the sister's son. And he said that his entire life he had been treated differently because his mother's niece was taken. And so she was afraid to let him go outside and play. She was terrified of people that she didn't know coming around him. And they lived their whole life almost in fear because of that incident, not being able to resolve that incident that had happened to them. It even affected his children and the children after that. So these are things that people will tell you. You're right. This is a multi-generational thing. And you live with those questions. You live with those doubts in your mind of, is this person going to call me? Are they going to come back? Are they looking for me? Are they on Facebook? I hear from families often that they spend hours a day looking for someone on Facebook, scrolling through faces and hoping they'll find the person because maybe they changed their name, maybe they changed some, like anyone with the same first name. I can't imagine missing someone I love so very much and spending hours a day looking for them. But I do know that even when the news isn't good news, even when the news is this is what happened to your loved one and they're no longer here, they're always thanking us. They're always grateful because they feel like the truth allows them to move over to the next chapter of this story and that they were sort of stuck there. And that's really heavy and it's really hard to think about. And unless you've been in that situation where you've lost someone or something happened to someone you loved very much, I think it's hard to process. But I have not met one family member. I have not met one law enforcement agent that worked a case for decades that didn't need to know that answer. And the ripple effect of how many people a case affects is huge. We think of the family, right? That's the first thing you think about. Okay, well, here's the family that was affected by the fact that this person was murdered or they left. But then there are the people that are suspects in that investigation that didn't commit the crime and their families and how they feel affected, because often these happen in towns where people know a lot about people. I've met people that were suspects for 46 years and went to Alaska to exile themselves because they felt so guilty about the fact that the entire community believed that they had committed that crime. It really is a big blast radius, much larger than people think, for every one of these cold cases. And there's 250,000 of these cold cases in the United States today, and over 40,000, 50,000 unidentified remains where we don't even know who the victim is. How do you even start that investigation? And they're missing from someone. Their story is gone forever. The Granby case that we're talking about today, her bones were so contaminated that she would have remained unnamed. And by remaining unnamed, not only is her son someone that would never know what happened to his mother and where she went, but the crime could never be investigated. Obviously, someone murdered her. Obviously, her body was left there. So now it's time to figure out what happened and how can you piece someone's last few weeks of life together, who got her there, who saw her last, who she was with, what was going on in her relationship, all of the things that you need to know as an investigator. If you don't have a name for that person, you can't do it. And this technology allows for that to happen. It allows for people to be able to tell the rest of the story, to truly get justice for these people. And maybe her perpetrator's dead. I know her husband at the time is a big person of interest in this case, in this investigation. That's already been public. And he's already passed away. So maybe justice isn't something that will happen in this lifetime, but her story will be told the way that it should, not as someone that disappeared from her family's life and never came back, but as someone that was murdered. And the person that murdered her, their name will go down as someone that murdered someone and not just someone that got away with it. I think that's important. to be able to piece people's stories back to reality. And I think that's a lot of what we do here at Othram, and it means the world to me.
And now we're going to play a clip with Matt Dale, who is Patricia Tucker's son. And if you want to hear this episode in its entirety, you can scroll back to April of 2023. It's episode 381.
This particular ordeal is it's about my mother, also known as Granby Girl. I guess about 2.5 months ago now or so, we done a DNA test, or I had previously done my DNA trying to find my mother. And the Massachusetts State Police called me and asked me if I would be willing to submit another one. And I said, I don't need to. I've already got it on here. And I sent it to them, and within 3 hours, they had a 100% match saying that it was my mother.
Wow, so that seemed to move pretty quick once you heard from the Mass State Police.
Yes, it was extremely fast. It was almost mind-blowing to me. They had already had Othram standing by waiting on my DNA, actually. Officer Cahill had let me know that that's who they were using, and honestly, I didn't know who they were. It was pretty much irrelevant. The police were using them, so I figured it was a good company.
Can you take us through what it was like when you started to look for your mom?
Didn't quite know what to expect. I didn't know if she was alive or passed on. I have her social security number. So I had my sister-in-law, which you have already spoke to. I had her run it, and of course there were multiple hits on it, but no physical hits, no person that you could actually talk to. I mean, it was a roller coaster ride for sure then. We've been doing this for a couple of years with really no avail. I guess just what I call ghost hits, where either her social security number would pop up, but there was nobody there, or her name would pop up when, again, nobody was there.
How would you be notified of those hits in her social security number?
My sister-in-law. She was the one that was taking care of everything for me. We communicated at least weekly about that situation. And then I would tell her to back off a little bit. Let's just wait, let it rest, see what happens. And then we'd go back at it again. I mean, we've done this for a couple of years now. And I'd came to the conclusion several years ago that she had passed on. I felt like if she had still been around, she would have come looking for me. In my eyes, anyhow.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because this is a rare opportunity that we get to speak with someone who has final information about the individual who they might have thought left them. And we've been speaking with a bunch of people who have been in situations like that, or law enforcement, or even representatives from Othram, who have said it's just tough to think about someone like yourself in that position, and then having to come to terms with, well, I think my mother probably passed on. And your mother left your life in 1978. Patricia Tucker left your life in 1978. So from that point, how long was it before you came to the determination that she probably didn't abandon you, that she probably had passed on? And can you take us down that path a little bit?
I was probably in my late teens, early 20s. My wife and I had started dating, and of course, she wanted to know about my past, and I never really have talked to it, even to a full extent, up until recently with her. But she'd always asked me about my mother, because I always had her picture, but I never really said a whole lot about it. I just told her that I had been left at an early age, and that approximately about that time that I thought she had passed away. I said, I don't believe, if she was still alive, I don't believe that she would have just forgotten about me, period.
What do you remember from that time when you were 5?
Quite a bit, actually.
Oh, really?
It's images in your head that you can never forget. You can remember certain things or certain smells or sounds. I thought that the detectives actually thought that I was crazy when I would explain exactly what the house looked like, or a body of water that was extremely close. Even for me at 5 years old, I could walk to it easily. So they didn't quite know how to take all that, but yeah, I can remember everything pretty vivid.
I'm thinking about you saying that you you could still remember the smells and the fine details of that age. I mean, does all that just come rushing back?
Literally. It's no warning sign to it. When the detectives asked certain questions, I had to go back to that time instantly. So, yeah, there was no warning whatsoever, which I don't want that to discourage anybody else that's trying to find their families. It's well worth it just to know. And for us to sit down and do a whole lot of prayer beforehand, because it'll rattle you like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It must have been a complete whirlwind.
It was. I mean, I'm not a very emotional person. When it hits you all at once like that, you don't have a choice. You will break down pretty quick, and luckily I've got a good wife and family. They picked me back up.
Yeah, and what was that like being at the press conference, if you don't mind me asking, where everybody is talking about your mom and they're sharing a lot of details about her life?
Out of all honesty, I don't even know what they said. I shut down. I mean, like I said, right directly before that press conference, I was given all the information. They were sliding papers across the table to me. Do you remember this person, that person, so forth and so on? And I was still absorbing that when there's like, all right, press is here. Like, okay, then. So I turned off, basically.
So I don't mean to make light of this, but you're receiving all of this information and they're passing you pictures of people in the sense of, do you recognize this person because they might be a person of interest in your mom's murder? That's what they were doing. And then it was like, let's go to the press. I mean, how did they expect you to react on that? That's how much information can one human being process in a short period of time?
The person of interest, we already knew who that was. We had talked about that well ahead of time. But the pictures they were sending across the table were people in that circle. If I could remember faces, certain things like that. And I'm like, look, that was 50 years ago. Well, 45 years ago. I said, you're showing me pictures of them now. I need to see them then in order to remember. And the DA understood. Everybody there was working with me real well. So they went online and tried to pull up pictures and stuff like that. And it's virtually impossible when you don't have time to prepare and get everything together. And for me to get my mindset there, it was just hard. I can't say it's going to be easy for anybody else that, Lord willing, they do find their family member. It is what it is. You pray through it and hope for the best.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine the shakeup in your life to learn something about you and your family that you hadn't known for years, like something so big like that had developed for decades.
I mean, you hear stories from different family members. I mean, within 2 years of that, my dad brought me down to where I live now, and it was stopped. He never spoke of it. Nobody. My grandmother, I did go visit her back up in New Jersey a few times after that. She really didn't speak of it because she thought I was too young or whatever the case was, but everybody stopped. It was me that kind of, well, more so my wife's family, my sister-in-laws, that pushed it, trying to say, all right, let's try to take this a step further and figure out what else we can do. So they finally talked me into the DNA test. Knowing that I had all of them behind me helped.
When you took the DNA test, did it take much convincing on their end?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes. For myself, I don't have social media or anything like that. I despise it. The only thing that's ever stayed the same about me is I've kept my same phone number since cell phones came out and my same address since my wife and I have been together. And we've been together for 31 years.
And was that purposeful?
Yes. That was just in case I was wrong and she was still alive. Make it a little easier to find me.
When you were thinking about where she went or anything, did I know you thought that she might have passed at some point, but did you expect her to have been met with foul play?
I didn't think so. But I guess in the back of my mind, remembering the person of interest, yeah, I guess I could have related to that.
And do you remember him at all?
Yes.
Was he an asshole back then?
Yes. I put the scar above his eye.
Oh, really?
Yes.
How'd you do that?
Can't remember if he was drunk or whatever the case was, but he came in, threw a belt across my back, and instinctively, even at that young age, I was playing with a Lionel train. I come around swinging it. And I busted him open.
Wow.
I bet that was a bit of a surprise to him.
Yeah, I guarantee it. But it was without warning. I mean, it's not like, hey, you're going to get your butt whooped for this. You kind of knew what to expect. This was just random. He come up, cracked my back, and I just reacted.
Why was he motivated to take a belt to your back?
People like that, you don't ever know. I've learned a lot more about him than I knew, obviously, before. There was something that clicked in him that it turned him for the bad anyhow.
Right, so you knew even as a 5-year-old that this was a bad person.
Yes.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program.
And knowing your mother has been identified and her grave marker is going to be changed to properly represent her, on what level does that give you a sense of closure or justice?
Well, obviously, I can never get the justice for her, but the closure, yes, it gives me a great deal of closure.
How do you feel when you found out that the community of Granby sort of rallied behind identifying your mom and chipped in for this headstone?
I thought that was pretty awesome. That's why during the press conference, of course, I don't want to speak to those folks. So we did write up something real quick for them and pretty much expressed how we felt about them. They're great people. It's a small community, which is what I live in now. We're a small community. The new headstone, Lord willing, Lou will be able to get this took care of. We did honor the Granby community I had Granby Girl put under her name. Because that's exactly what she is. I mean, she's been there since 1978. She belongs to that community.
You used the word community a few times there, and the support of the community was important to you. What is the support of the community or a community in general? Because I feel like that's something that is important to you.
It is. Where I live now, the community here is not quite as close as what they are up there, but we are close here. Everybody here knows me because I've been a baseball coach, softball coach, and a shooting instructor for years. And so they all know me. So when they found out through the news and everything like this, everybody was calling me, texting me, "Are you okay? Can we do anything for you?" And that's kind of what reminds me of Granby. They had no idea who this woman was. And I read the news articles from back then. And they kept up with her trying to find any information whatsoever from what I could read up to 2003, I think. To me, that's great. I mean, obviously, I had no idea she was still up there, so I didn't look in that region. But they tried their best to put the information out there, I guess, for the times with what they had.
Do you remember when your mom was, I guess, classified or reported as a missing person?
I was told about it, of course, later in life that they had reported her. Was told that they hired the detectives. The detectives handed it over to the FBI for whatever reason. I didn't figure that would go very far, not with an adult anyhow. But right now, the Mass State Police and the Granby Police detectives are still trying to work with the FBI because it's all handwritten stuff, not computerized, and trying to find any kind of more information they could get out of it.
And Tim was telling me that he spoke with you a few nights ago as sort of a pre-interview or just a breaking the ice type of chat. And he said that aside from the press that you did when this all came about, you're not much of a press guy. And I wanted to ask you why you chose to do this particular interview with us and what you see as the importance of this.
The importance of what you guys are doing is, number one, your podcast is called Missing. So this is what I've been dealing with my entire life, basically, is a missing parent. There's thousands of people out here that are missing a child, a sibling, a mother, a father, aunt, uncle, somebody they're trying to reconnect with that they don't know what the situation is. Well, maybe they can learn off of what I did or what happened with me, not necessarily what I did, and actually help themselves. I mean, I want everybody to have closure. Nobody should have to deal with the pain of losing somebody and not ever knowing it. I mean, I know that every scenario is not perfect. You may have a mother or father that doesn't want to deal with you or whatever the case may be, but at least you know. Everybody needs that knowledge to know and make their own decision.
In your experience leading up to this point, how much hope did you have?
In the beginning, I had a lot of hope. And then, of course, like I said, when I got into my teens, the hope kind of dwindled. And then throughout the years, I mean, like I said, my sister-in-laws were getting hits, and then they found out to be nothing. And then finally, I come home one day from work, and my local detectives, they pulled in 2 guys that I know, and they said my name, and first thing I said is, "Oh, Lord, what did he do now?" Because I have a child that carries my name. And they said, "No, this time it's you." I was like, "Oh, Lord, what have I done?" And they handed me the Mass State Police's phone number and said, "You need to call these guys." So they left, and I immediately come inside, and I called them. I'm like, "This is Matt Dale." I said, "What can I do for you today?" And he didn't really go into a lot of detail at first, but he was asking me if I had anybody in my family missing. And I said, "Of course, I've got a mother that's been missing my whole life." He said, "Well, would you mind doing a DNA test?" Well, I immediately told him I had already done it under ancestry. He said, "Can you send me the file? Or can you allow me permission to get into it?" I said, "I'll send you the file, and then you guys can do whatever you need to do with it." He said, "Let me get back to you. I'll call you right back." And just a few minutes later, he called me back. He said, "Othram is already waiting. They're going to wait until they get your file, and then I'll be able to get back in touch with you." 3 hours later, like I said, he called me. He said, "I got 100% parent-child match. This is your mother." I was like, "You're kidding." He said, "No, I'm not." He said, "This has been a cold case since 1978. I was like, "Wow, okay then." So that's when the flashbacks started happening. And I don't want people to get discouraged just because, yes, it's going to be an emotional rush. You're going to have to go backwards and forwards, and it's just unreal. But people need to know. If they didn't want to know, they wouldn't do their DNA, or they wouldn't ask people questions. They would just let it go. But this has been ongoing for years, and I finally got a answer at least.
Right. So when you saw the detectives at your house, they gave you the phone number to the Mass State Police, but they didn't tell you what it was in regards to?
No, they had no information whatsoever.
Good for you for calling.
There had to be a reason for it.
Yeah, there had to have been a good reason for it. Did you have, maybe looking back on it now, did you have sort of a inkling or like a subconscious notion that this was about your mom?
Honestly, had no clue. I mean, it could go several different ways. There was no other way of knowing unless I did it. Unless I made that phone call, I wouldn't have known one way or the other. And when these guys, and I've known for years, come up and tell me, "Hey, you need to call Mass State Police. They're very serious about finding you. They tried to call you." And he did. Officer Cahill did try to call me. And I was at work, so of course I'm not going to answer it. But it was the exact same number that they gave me, so there was something to it for some reason.
Okay, so you had a voicemail from the Mass State Police, and then you saw your local detectives on the same day.
Unfortunately, no, there wasn't a voicemail. It was just a phone number. But there's no such thing as a coincidence. So when you put those two things together, there's a reason. I mean, if it's not God slapping you in the back of the head telling you to pay attention, then something's wrong.
Was there any hesitation on your part in making that phone call?
No. As soon as I walked back in the door, I called.
You mentioned you're a parent yourself. How does the identification of your mom change your family dynamic or life with your child?
He was curious. He's always seen the picture. Understand why he looks the way he does too. We're both dark hair, dark complexion, just like she was. He has met her mother, my grandmother. I took him up there, but he was real little. So he doesn't really remember that. But he wanted to come up with me the first time, and I told him that's not a good idea yet. I'm going to try to make it where him, his wife, and my grandson, they can come up with me when we come up the next time. We just have to make sure everything's in line before everybody, all of my wife's family, they want to come up with us. Because, like I said, they've been right there the whole time. They would like to come. Of course, my kids want to come. It's just getting everything planned this time a lot better than what I did the first time.
Your kid or kids, are they emotional about this identification?
I have a stepdaughter. That's why I keep saying kids. She's not really emotional, of course. She's always known. I've had her since she was 6. My son was more worried about me breaking down than the rest of the situation. He was more worried about his dad. I mean, my mom's somebody he never knew, except for what little bit that I've told him until recently. Now they know everything. He's seen a few baby pictures that I've acquired. And then, of course, my baby books that everybody has talked about. But really, he was more worried about just me breaking down.
And what do you say to him, or what do you do to reassure him that you're going to be okay?
I just tell him God's got this. I just pretty much laid it in God's hands.
And those baby books that you mentioned, you've had those for most of your life or your whole life?
Most of it, yes. Still don't know how I acquired them. Makes no sense to me, but I've had all that put in a box for years and years and years with notes and other stuff where I'd done a little bit of research beforehand and never got touched until the detectives called. So now my son's going back through it. My grandson, he wants to see the pictures of me, and my wife's been going through it page for page. I've had a friend of the family that I didn't even know about. She sent some pictures to the police department, to Detective White. Well, then he sent them to me after they got done with them. And my kids really had a ball out of those pictures.
These are all pictures of you as a child?
Yes.
You said it doesn't quite make sense to you. What were you referring to when you said that you had the pictures, but it didn't quite make sense to you?
I couldn't remember and it was the neighbors of where we lived. Evidently, my mom would take me over there. They had children, play with their kids. They took pictures. Of course, we'd eat over there all the time. Just all kinds of stuff. And I couldn't remember them because that was a good memory. You don't think as much about it as opposed to you have a traumatic happening come on. You're going to remember that. It's stuck in your mind forever. Even now, I still can't get those images out of my head, even though I know where she's at now.
And when we spoke with your sister-in-law, Lisa, she mentioned about the baby books as the way that she knew that your mom didn't abandon you. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, because the books are very well organized. Every doctor's appointment I've ever been to, the slip is in there. I have hair in there. The way that she wrote out the things was very neat, nice, explained everything. Honestly, I've got baby books that I had bought when my kids were little, and I don't think I've ever written anything in them. Not that I don't love my kids, but for me, it's just time. My kids were growing up, I worked constantly. With my baby books, she was very meticulous about how things were written. It was very detailed, very organized. I couldn't imagine sitting down and being able to write a book like that for my kids.
Wow, that's impressive to include all the information about your appointments and things like that too. That must have showed you a lot.
It did. I mean, at first it didn't make sense. I was young. I thought, well, and it's ironic because it only does go up to 5 years old. Right dead at 5 years old is pretty much when it stops. There's no extra notes like throughout that year or anything. It was shortly after the birthday. I went to the doctor twice, I believe, and the notes are in there for that. And then that was it. So I don't know if she had given the books to my grandmother or what happened. I don't know how it came about that I even acquired them. I don't remember.
This is going to sound like a very strange question, so I'm going to do my best to articulate it. You've mentioned the fact that you've laid this in God's hands and you come across as a spiritual person. Is there a shift in the way, like, do you feel your mom's presence more now, knowing that there's some closure here?
I do. I feel hers and my grandmother's. My grandmother, we were close as long as I could be, which is her mother. But after all this had started up and started going through, I started seeing my grandmother's in my mind, more so saying thank you, that she's proud of me or whatever. Lord, this wasn't just me. This was definitely meant to be. I mean, she could have been under an unknown marker until I die, and nobody would have ever known.
When you think about your life and moving on from this point, are there any ways that you can tell you're going to live differently now?
No, not really. I mean, I'm happier that I know, but as far as changing my life, no, I don't believe so. I believe it's still, I try to leave as much as I can in God's hands. I don't think I've seen this part written in my future, but I'm glad he slapped me in the head for it and let me deal with it.
And will you be coaching baseball this summer?
Actually, my son is doing it now. My son is coaching right now. He's coaching my grandson.
Are you the umpire or something, or are you just on the stands now?
I'm on the stands, and every practice I'm still there. Every game I'm still there. They're playing tournaments right now for the beginning of the season, and I've not missed a practice or a game yet.
Well, Matt, this has been a great conversation. We really appreciate you joining us and sharing your story and your mom and your family's story. Is there anything else you'd like to say here today?
Don't give up. Never give up, period. There's always going to be a way. And I'm going to say that right now, for some reason, more so than any other time, the truth is coming to light. So don't be discouraged. God's going to show you whatever you're looking for.